All right, so this time we're diving into a real classic, Little Women, by Louisa May Alcott.
A classic for a reason, right?
Definitely. I'm sure many of our listeners are already familiar with this story.
At least in broad strokes, right?
Yeah, but we're going to do our usual deep dive here and really get into those first few chapters.
Sounds fun.
Oh, it is. So, to refresh everyone's memory a bit, we're dealing with the March family.
Right, and it's the height of the Civil War.
Which is a huge deal for this family.
Absolutely. I mean, their father's away serving as a chaplain.
So it's just the girls and their mom.
Marmee, as they call her.
And they're really feeling that absence both emotionally and, well, practically.
Financially, it's a struggle, and that's where we really see their personalities come into play, wouldn't you say?
Oh, 100%. Right from chapter 1, playing pilgrims. I mean, it's Christmas time, and what do they want more than anything?
Presents. But not just any presents.
Right, this isn't just frivolous wanting.
Yeah.
They each long for something specific.
Which, by the way, tells us so much about them.
Totally. We've got Meg, the oldest, always practical.
But with a romantic streak.
Exactly. She wants nice gloves.
Which, let's be honest, makes sense. Gloves were a big deal back then.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then there's Joe, my personal favorite.
Ah, yes, our resident tomboy. Full of energy and big dreams.
Always got her nose stuck in a book.
So naturally she wants.
Books.
Of course.
And then sweet, gentle Beth.
The musical one.
Always drawn to beauty and harmony.
And her heart's set on a piano.
But then there's a little tension, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing to want things, but remember, they're not exactly well off.
It's the Civil War era, and money is tight. So they feel this pressure, this weight to be selfless.
Which is a theme that Alcott explores beautifully throughout the novel, wouldn't you say?
For sure. It's this internal tug of war that I think a lot of us can relate to, even today. That desire for something versus feeling like you should put others first.
Absolutely. It's that classic dilemma of personal desire versus social responsibility. And for young women in that era, those societal expectations were even more pronounced.
Right. It's not just about wanting a new book or a pair of gloves. It's about navigating these expectations placed on them by society. And Alcott doesn't shy away from that complexity.
Not one bit. And that's what makes it so interesting, right? These seemingly simple desires are actually layered with all sorts of social and historical contexts.
Exactly. It's a great reminder that even something as seemingly timeless as wanting a Christmas present can be influenced by the world around us. And speaking of context, let's talk about Marmee's little suggestion in Chapter 1, playing Pilgrim's Progress.
Ah, yes, a brilliant move by Alcott.
Because it's not just a game to them, is it?
Not at all. Think about it. Pilgrim's Progress is all about this journey towards a better place.
With all its challenges and temptations along the way.
Exactly. And in a way, that becomes a metaphor for the March sisters' own lives. Each of them, in their own way, is on a journey of self-discovery.
And they each have their own burdens to bear.
Which Alcott so cleverly lays out for us right from the start. Meg, for instance, is acutely aware of their poverty.
She sees the wealth around her, and it makes her long for a more comfortable life.
Which, let's be honest, is a very human desire.
And then there's Joe, always butting heads with societal expectations.
She's got this fire in her, this yearning for something more than what's considered proper for a young woman of her time.
Right. She wants to write, to explore, to break free from those constraints. And then we have Beth.
Our sweet, shy Beth.
Content in her own little world, but also yearning for a way to express herself.
And that piano represents that for her, doesn't it? It's a means of releasing all that beauty she holds inside.
But of course, they can't really afford it, which just adds another layer of longing to her character.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have Amy.
Our youngest March sister.
And oh boy, does she have her own set of concerns.
Oh, no.
Her nose, of course.
Which to us might seem like a small thing.
But to Amy, it's this huge source of insecurity. She's convinced it's holding her back from being truly beautiful and accepted by others.
Which just goes to show you, even in the 19th century, teenagers still had insecurities.
Oh, absolutely. It's a timeless thing, isn't it? That feeling of not quite measuring up, of being self-conscious about our perceived flaws. And Alcott captures that so brilliantly with Amy.
And it's not just about physical appearances, is it? I mean, Amy's also got that competitive streak.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when it comes to her sisters.
Which, again, I think is something a lot of us can relate to, right? Those sibling rivalries, wanting to be seen as just as good as your brother or sister.
It's a tale as old as time. And Alcott uses those dynamics to create such a realistic portrayal of family life, wouldn't you say?
100%. But getting back to those burdens for a sec, because Alcott really leans into them in chapter 4, burdens.
Right.
Like, Christmas is over, the excitement has faded, and suddenly everyday life feels a lot harder for the March sisters.
And their burdens feel that much heavier. Like, remember that New Year's Eve party Meg goes to?
Oh yeah, poor Meg. All dressed up in those tight slippers, dying to fit in with the wealthy crowd.
Classic Meg, right.
Totally. And what happens? She sprains her ankle.
And suddenly all that glamour fades, and she's left feeling foolish, and probably in a lot of pain.
Oh, for sure. But that's where Lordy comes in again.
Ah, yes, our knight in shining armor, or at least a kind neighbor with a carriage.
Exactly. He offers to take her home. And it's such a small gesture, but it really shows his character.
Absolutely. He's observant, he's thoughtful, and he's clearly drawn to Meg's plight.
And maybe a little smitten with her too. But anyway, that whole ankle incident, it kind of highlights the class difference between them, wouldn't you say?
Oh, 100%. Meg is so acutely aware of what she doesn't have, especially surrounded by all that wealth and luxury.
Right. And it makes her burden, that desire for a comfortable life, feel even stronger.
Exactly. And then there's Jo. Poor Jo, who just wants to be free to be herself, to write her stories, to run and climb and defy all those expectations placed on young women back then.
And instead, she's stuck at home, helping with chores, feeling restless and stifled.
Precisely. And it's interesting because her burden isn't necessarily tied to material possessions, right? It's more about societal constraint.
It's about feeling trapped by those expectations, yearning for something more. And then we have Beth, who just wants a simple thing, really.
A piano.
But it represents so much more than just an instrument to her.
It's a means of expression, a connection to beauty, a way to share her gifts with the world.
But it feels so out of reach for her. They can't afford it. And that unattainability, that's part of her burden too.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's Amy. Still fixated on her nose.
Poor Amy. Always comparing herself to others, worried about what people think.
Which, again, is something I think we can all relate to, right? That feeling of not measuring up, of being self-conscious about our flaws. But in Amy's case, it manifests in this almost comical obsession with her appearance.
Totally.
Yeah.
But there's also something kind of heartbreaking about it too, isn't there? Like, under all that vanity, she's just a young girl who wants to be loved and accepted.
Exactly. And that's what makes Alcott such a skilled writer. She takes these seemingly small, relatable anxieties and shows us how they connect to larger issues of self-esteem and societal pressure. But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? I mean, even in the midst of these struggles, Marmee always seems to have these little words of wisdom to offer.
Oh yeah, she's the best at that. Remember that scene in chapter 4 where she gathers the girls together and tells them that story about being grateful for their blessings?
Classic Marmee.
Totally. It's such a simple message, but it really resonates, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with messages about wanting more, being more.
It's a good reminder to stop and appreciate what we have, even when things are tough.
100%. But you know what else I love about that scene? It's not like Marmee's lecturing them, It's more like she's sharing a story, a piece of herself.
Which makes it that much more impactful.
Totally. She's leading by example, showing them the power of gratitude and perspective. But then, just when you think the story's going to settle into these everyday struggles, Alcott throws in another curveball, right?
Enter Laurie, or rather re-enter Laurie in a whole new light.
In a way, yeah. It happens in chapter 5, Being Neighborly, which is a very telling title, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely, because it's not just about being friendly neighbors, is it? There's this sense of curiosity, of boundaries being crossed, of something deeper developing.
It's Jo, of course, who just can't resist a good mystery, right?
Oh, absolutely. That Lawrence mansion, all big and imposing, it's like this irresistible challenge to her.
She even calls it an enchanted palace at one point.
Which is so telling of her romantic nature, don't you think?
Totally. Even though she tries so hard to be a tomboy, there's this part of her that's drawn to adventure and, well, maybe even a little bit of romance.
Definitely. And Laurie represents that for her. He's this breath of fresh air, a connection to a world outside of her own.
And it's so interesting to see how their dynamic shifts in this chapter.
How so?
Well, before it was all about Jo kind of observing him from afar, trying to figure him out.
True.
But now, she's taking charge. She's the one initiating things, sneaking over to his house, trying to draw him out of his shell.
Which, let's be honest, is no easy feat with Laurie. He's got his own baggage, his own reasons for being withdrawn.
Absolutely. But Jo, in her own clumsy way, she manages to break through those walls.
And that's the beauty of their relationship, isn't it? They challenge each other. They bring out these hidden sides of themselves that they might not show to anyone else.
Exactly. And I think that's something that really resonates with readers, even today. That idea of finding someone who sees you, truly sees you for who you are.
Absolutely. Someone who accepts your flaws and encourages you to be your best self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not all sunshine and roses with the March sisters, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, even in these early chapters, we see those little hints of jealousy and rivalry.
Oh, for sure. Like when Meg gets invited to that fancy party and Joe's a little bit envious.
Totally. And then there's Amy, always trying to keep up with her older sisters, but never quite feeling like she measures up.
It's that classic sibling dynamic. The love is there, the loyalty is there, but there's also this undercurrent of competition.
Definitely. And those dynamics, they just add another layer of complexity to the story, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, because it reminds us that even the closest of families, even the most loving relationships, have their challenges. And it's those challenges, those moments of conflict and resolution, that make the story feel so real, so relatable.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these first 5 chapters of Little Women, I'm curious, what are you left thinking about? What's sticking with you?
Well, for me, it's amazing to think about how much Alcott packs into just these first few chapters. I mean, we've got everything here: things of family, social class, ambition, love, loss, self-discovery. It's all there, simmering beneath the surface of this seemingly simple story.
Right. And those themes, they continue to resonate with readers generation after generation because they tap into these universal truths about the human experience.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder, I think, that even though Little Women was written over 150 years ago, the stories it tells, the characters it portrays, they still have something to teach us today.
So, to our listeners, we encourage you to revisit Little Women,
Yeah.
to get lost in its world, to connect with its characters. And as you journey alongside the March sisters, think about your own life, your own dreams, your own burdens, because within their stories, you might just find a little piece of yourself.
Beautifully said.